Let's speak now to personal finance expert Jasmine Birtles. Also with us is Peter Tutton from the charity StepChange Debt. And it's interesting, Peter, hearing those people talk about different attitudes towards debt. Maybe there's a generational thing going on here. Maybe the baby boomers are saying live within your means because they've always been able to afford to.
Well, we've seen credit grow since the end of the 90s. It's become a very accepted part of people's everyday lives. And that's okay if you can afford it. But two things that we see. One is, of course, things happen to you, lose your job, have a health problem, relationship breakdown, I mean, you can't afford it. And we're seeing more people with kind of insecure work, more likely to fall over, very little resilience to recover if you do. And the second thing is we're seeing more people, about 8 million people, who are having to use credit just to pay household bills. So that's a heady mix of problems.
And that's what we talk about. That's what we mean when we talk about this problem debt, using it for every day.
It is. I think when we see people who often, because they're trying to cope with a low income or shock to their finances, it's easy to get into using credit. That can work in the short term, but in the long term, it can be a difficult strategy. And we see some of the products with overdrafts and credit cards. It's easy for people to get into that cycle. Lenders need to help people a bit earlier to get out of it. People need better options.
Jasmine, one more question about the why before we get on to the how we sort it out. Is just Britain's relationship with having debt different to everyone else's? I mean, mortgage rates are a common conversation for all sort of ages.
Well, yes, Ireland, America, certainly, we have this sense that it's perfectly all right to borrow, and how much can I borrow, actually? Whereas if you go to China or Germany or a number of other countries, they wouldn't dream of borrowing. So there is definitely a different philosophy between the countries about whether it's okay even to borrow money.
What's the way out then of consumer debt problems first and foremost? For
individuals? Well, there are a few things that you can do. Firstly, I would say that, if you're even beginning to think, I've got a bit of a problem, I would go and get some help, like StepChange. One of the free debt advice agencies is also Citizens Advice. There are actually quite a lot. Christians Against Poverty will help. They'll help you budget so that you don't get into really problem debt.
Peter, what should the industry be doing then? Because it looks like they're creeping back to pre-credit crunch ideas about overlending.
I think what we need from the industry is lending has to be responsible. I think we have to look at the products and make sure that there aren't features of the products and the way they're lent.
Is anyone going to make sure they stop doing that?
We have a regulator, Financial Conduct Authority, whose job it is to do that. Certainly we think the FCA has taken some action on credit cards. We think it needs to, and high cost credit. We think it needs to take some more. It needs to look at things like overdrafts. So that's something lenders need to do. Also, where people are struggling, one of the problems we really see is when people start to struggle, you start using credit to pay credit, and then your problems can accelerate quickly. Yeah. That's when the help needs to come, where lenders are in a good position to spot that early and give people some better options.
So if you're using your credit card for groceries, you've got a problem, you need to move on. Just very quickly, Jasmine, though, this idea that interest rates, the Bank of England could raise them in the next month or two, that can be a signifier of an improving economy.
Well, it can, yes, certainly, because if the Bank of England is going to bring interest rates up, that's because they feel that the economy is robust enough to cope with that. But at the same time, even if the economy generally can do it, that still means that individuals, actual families, could find that it'll make their lives much harder.
There's that lag, isn't there, between the two. Thank you both very much indeed.